This is an introductory lesson for the 2021 IEB English Home Language Common Assessment Task. This video should be used in conjunction with Task 1 as outlined in the official task sheet sent to all grade 12 English teachers in March of 2021. This year's topic is a fabulous one: finding your voice in writing. What's in the CAT this year? Well, this video introduction is task 1. It's a general orientation and doesn't count for marks. At the end of this video lesson, I shall give you some homework, research, which you will need to complete for task 2. You will use the resources that you collect for task 2 for the oral activity, that is task 3. Your teacher will probably divide you into groups and monitor your conversations and discussions. Task 4 is the biggie. This is the exam-style written response in which you will have to write 2 pieces. One will be an analysis in which you will respond to a text provided by the examiner. The other will be a transactional piece based on the same topic as the analysis. You will be given a date on which to write this task under formal IEB exam conditions. This must take place before the end of July. You won't know in advance what the topic is. Task 5 is a prepared speech based on the 7 additional books that you have read in grades 10, 11 and 12. Yes, those books, the ones that we've been nagging you to read for the past couple of years. You'll have to speak for 4 to 5 minutes and incorporate a visual aid into your speech, such as a PowerPoint presentation. Your teachers will decide whether your prepared reading and listening assignments are taken from this CAT or not, making tasks 6 and 7 optional. In other words, you still have to do a formal listening assessment and a prepared reading task, but it doesn't have to come from this CAT assignment. Let's get to it. To find your own voice, you first have to look at the way that other writers have found theirs, or sometimes not found theirs. Don't worry if you're not sure what a writer's voice is, or if you have no clue what your writing voice sounds like. That's the purpose of this CAT. Look at this quote by the award-winning American author Paula Fox. I don't know what makes a writer's voice. It's dozens of things. There are people who write who don't have it. They're tone deaf even though they're very fluent. It's an ability like anything else. We're in good company. If an author like Paula Fox struggles to define a writer's voice, then we mustn't feel too bad as we grapple with this ourselves. Starting with the known is helpful. Think about your own reading. You should be able to think about the 7 books that you have read as part of your independent reading assignments in the past few years. Who's your favorite author? What is it about this author that you like? Is it the style of writing, the type of books that he or she writes? And who's your favorite fictional character? What drew you to this character? Let me introduce you to 5 authors who have been able to find their voices in the books that they have written. You might like Brittany Morris as an author. She wrote the novel Slay, in which the protagonist is a teenage black girl, Kira Johnson, who attends a predominantly white school. Kira is the developer of an online game called Slay that celebrates all things black. Brittany Morris says that she writes the novels that she wishes she could have read as a Black American teenager, as she never heard the echo of her own experiences, her own voice, in the books she read. Jason Reynolds is another American author who deliberately writes books to give a voice to kids who are just like him. His novel, Long Way Down, well, actually it's a slam poem that's as long as a novel, tells the story of Will, whose brother is shot dead during gang violence. Samira Ahmed gave a voice to American Muslims who have experienced bias and prejudice in the United States. Her novel Internment is the story of a young Muslim girl, Layla Amin, who must find her voice in the face of government oppression. Kathleen Glasgow wrote Girl in Pieces about the journey back to mental health of the protagonist, Charlotte Davis. It's a powerful novel that addresses very difficult issues, including substance abuse and self-harming. A last example from our own country, the inspiring story of actress and activist Rosie Motene, whose struggle to find her authentic voice, her identity, is recounted in her book, Reclaiming the Soil. I hope you've read some of these books. They're all thought-provoking and challenge the way that the reader thinks about everyday issues. Which one of these 5 books appeals most to you? Why is that? If you were able to write a novel for your age group, what topic would you choose to write about? Why? If you're using this video in the classroom, pause it here and discuss these questions. And those of you who don't read, please contribute to the discussion. Why don't you read? Is it possible that you're not hearing your own voice in the books that have been suggested to you? We need to dig a little deeper now by asking ourselves some more questions. Again, if you are using this video in the classroom or with a study group, pause the video at the end of these 4 questions and discuss your answers with one another. Who do you listen to? I don't mean in terms of family or school authority. I mean in terms of public figures, from politicians, religious figures, to actresses and singers. Who do you devote your time listening to? And remember that reading is also a form of listening. Who do you follow on social media? Does this list overlap with the first list? And how do you follow them? Which apps do you use? What do you read by choice? Where do you get information? Do you Google everything? Do you read news from particular websites? Do you read more fiction or non-fiction? If someone or some organization could change your mind, who would that be? And how do you think someone would be able to change your mind? Would they appeal to your emotions, or would they appeal to your sense of logic with facts and figures? Jot down your responses to these questions so that you can return to them at a later date. In smaller groups, you should answer the questions that follow. Take time to really think about your answers and listen carefully to what your group members have to say. If necessary, ask Mr. Google to help you to find out any background information that you might need. You'll remember the hoo-ha about the American elections and the invasion of the Capitol building in Washington this year. How did you respond to this news? With sympathy for any group? With anger? With amusement? Do you ever think about how the Trump supporters got to this point? Whose message were they following on this day? If you can, find examples of the various posters and written protest materials that were used on the day, even the writings on the flags, the badges worn on the clothing of the protesters. What does the writing tell you? Why do you think they took such drastic action to get their voices heard? And have they been in any way successful? After the dust had settled, President Joe Biden was inaugurated, and this young lady, Amanda Gorman, delivered a spoken word poem at the inauguration ceremony. What do you know of her? Why do you think she was chosen? Look for a YouTube video of the poem. It's called The Hill We Climb. Whose voice is she using? Staying in the United States, one celebrity who has actually used the phrase finding my voice or using my voice is Meghan Markle, the American wife of the British Prince Harry. Do you think that her recent interview with Oprah Winfrey is an example of finding one's voice or even amplifying one's voice? Do you care about this issue at all? Why is that? Let's move closer to home with Trevor Noah, one of South Africa's most successful exports to the United States. You might have seen him hosting the 2021 Grammy Awards. Why has he been so successful? What do you think it is about his voice that is being heard? Do you know that his autobiography, Born a Crime, is prescribed reading in some American high schools? Another South African public figure and author who has found his voice is Eusebius Mkheza. He's a gay black man whose professional life is devoted to speaking on radio, on television, and in his books and articles. Do some research about this media personality and track his development in finding his voice. This section would be incomplete without a reference to one of the greatest of South African voices, Steve Biko. Although he died in police custody, his voice is still heard today. If you haven't read his work, I Write What I Like, you should. We had a brief look at the Washington Capitol protests. Closer to home, there are protests too. How are you responding to the current round of FEESMUSTFALL protests at South African universities? Ask yourself the same questions that were asked on the slide about the American protests. Why do you think these protests are happening in South Africa? Again, is any voice being heard? If so, whose? Are the protests in any way successful? Can you see yourself joining in a protest of this nature? Now look for SIPHOKAZI Jonas's graduation poem, which she delivered at the virtual graduation of the University of Cape Town on the 14th of March 2020. You'll find it on YouTube. SIPHOKAZI writes and performs this poem that speaks to the challenge of graduating under the shadow of a changing global experience. How do you feel about next year, post-high school? Are you going to study at university? Does SIPHOKAZI's voice echo your own? It's time to turn the spotlight on you and to think about finding your own voice. What issues do you feel strongly about? I mean, the stuff that keeps you awake at night, the stuff that your friends know will get you talking animatedly. How can you find a way to express yourself in such a way that others will listen to you, really take note of your views? It usually starts with putting your thoughts on paper. Yes, your thoughts, your voice. The first thing that draws a reader into a piece of writing is the voice, the writer's voice, that indefinable something which makes an intimate connection possible between writer and reader. So how do you go about developing that unique style and tone which extends your personality onto the page? I'll give you some tips on the next slides. The best writers are voracious readers. By constantly filling your brain with words and thoughts of others, you'll find your own ideas taking shape and rising to the surface. The secret to being a good writer is simple. Just write. Write as often as you can. It doesn't matter what you write. Just write. Keep a notebook with you at all times. Jot down words, ideas, thoughts as they hit you. It doesn't have to make sense. There doesn't have to be a pattern. Just write down anything that seems worthwhile. I have a note function on my mobile phone, and when I hear someone use a word or a phrase that strikes me, I type it on my phone. I take photographs of interesting signs and posters. These phrases and ideas have often become the source of a piece of writing. Do the same. Become aware of the language and words that surround you. You need to write every single day. Not a lot, but you should keep that flow going. Don't worry about grammar rules and spelling. Just write. You're writing for yourself. Don't think about your English teacher's red pen or the rolling of your little brother's eyes. This is your voice, your story. You're writing for you, not them. Sometimes the best writing happens when you are writing so authentically that you're allowing others to see inside you. That's fine. Be vulnerable. Be quirky. It's part of the process of finding your authentic self. The page and the pen, or the keyboard and the screen, are your friends. Form a relationship with the instruments of writing. When you sit down to write, it should feel like you're joining a favorite friend for a chat. For those of you who wrote the National English Olympiad on the 16th of March this year, I suggest that you take a look at the prescribed anthology, in which each piece showcases the voice of a specific writer. You'll find brilliant examples here of first-person narratives. In preparation for task 2, you need to find examples of writing in which the voice is obvious. You should select a theme that interests you, and then find 3 different pieces of writing in which the writer's voice about that particular theme is clearly heard. These pieces of writing should be drawn from various sources. Try not to use novels. Look for things like editorials, op-eds, blog posts, open letters, letters to the press, the texts of speeches, any 3 different pieces that illustrate 3 different approaches to your selected theme. Here's an example of what that could look like. Imagine that your chosen theme is the wearing of school uniforms in South African schools. Your first text could be the school's official uniform policy. The second could be the text of the speech delivered by the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, earlier this year, in which she outlined reasons why South African government schools would keep uniforms. The third text could be a blog post written by a school pupil in which she expresses her opinion on the wearing of uniforms. All 3 of these texts have a common theme, but each one has a different voice. When you do task 2, you will look at how the writing styles of your chosen texts differ in such a way as to give a voice to the different authors. For this reason, it's better for you to have print or hard copies of your selected texts. You'll be able to highlight things and make notes on them. Choose a theme that really interests you. Whether it's pop music, politics, or pit bulls, it won't matter. Your teacher will give you a date by which you must have your resources to take to class for analysis and discussion. Have some fun while searching for articles. If you found this video introduction to the IEB's 2021 English Home Language Common Assessment task helpful, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And share your own resources too. None of us owns knowledge. We are ethically and morally bound to be generous with what we have, especially if we wish to establish educational equity in South Africa.